"Ma'am, why are there so many black SUVs outside your house?" The question drifted from across the street just as the low growl of engines settled into an eerie stillness, and Naomi Carter felt it in her chest before she fully saw it. A line of polished vehicles stretching bumper to bumper along her cracked sidewalk, their dark windows reflecting a neighborhood that had never seen anything like this. Not in all the years she'd lived here. Not in a place where rent was counted in tens of dollars and groceries were stretched across days. She stood barefoot on the worn wooden steps of her small rental, the early morning air cool against her skin, the scent of damp pavement rising as the sun barely touched the rooftops. And for a moment she didn't move, didn't breathe, because nothing about this felt like it belonged to her life. A car door opened with a soft, deliberate click that sounded louder than it should have, and then another, and another, until the quiet street seemed to hold its breath along with her. Curtains shifting, whispers rising, neighbors pausing mid-step just to watch, because something important was happening, something too big for this block. Naomi's fingers curled slightly against the railing, splinters pressing into her palm as her mind raced through every possible reason: unpaid bills, mistaken identity, something she didn't even know she'd done, but none of it made sense. None of it added up to this level of quiet power parked right outside her door. Then she saw the woman step out from the center vehicle, tall, composed, dressed in a way that didn't just suggest wealth but certainty, the kind of presence that didn't ask for space. It simply took it, and beside her, holding her hand, was a small girl with a white cane, her dark glasses catching the morning light, her head tilted slightly as if listening for something only she could hear. Naomi's heartbeat stuttered, because before anyone said a word, before the woman could even take a step forward, the girl spoke, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the tension like it had been waiting for this exact moment. "It's her. I know it's her." And the words landed with a weight Naomi couldn't explain, because she recognized that voice before she understood why, a memory surfacing too quickly, too vividly, pulling her backward. Through time to a hot afternoon just 3 days earlier, when the sun had pressed down like a hand on the back of her neck, when her stomach had been tight with hunger, when the only thing she had to look forward to was a small plastic container holding the last meal she'd allow herself before her second shift. And yet somehow, standing there now, surrounded by polished metal and silent attention, that simple moment felt like it had been the beginning of something far bigger than she ever imagined. 3 days earlier, the heat had settled over the city like a heavy blanket, pressing down on sidewalks that shimmered under the afternoon sun, and Naomi Carter sat alone on the narrow concrete steps behind the diner, her back against a chipped brick wall that still held the warmth of the day, her uniform slightly damp at the collar, her hands resting on a small plastic container that felt lighter than it should have. Because she already knew it would not be enough, she flipped the lid open. Slowly, the faint smell of rice and beans rising into the air, simple, cheap, but all she had until late evening. And for a moment she just looked at it, calculating in silence how long she could make each bite last, how to stretch something small into something that felt like enough. Then she heard it, a soft, uneven tapping, like a rhythm trying to find itself, followed by a pause. Then another tap, closer this time. And Naomi lifted her head, eyes narrowing slightly against the glare as she spotted a little girl standing near the edge of the alley, a white cane in her hand, her posture careful, uncertain, like she was listening more than seeing. The girl's shoes were dusty, her dress slightly wrinkled, and there was something about the way she stood there that did not match the polished world she must have come from, something out of place in this part of town. "Hello," the girl called softly, her voice small but steady, and Naomi felt something shift inside her chest before she even responded, because that voice carried a kind of quiet trust that did not belong in a place like this. Naomi pushed herself up, brushing her hands against her apron as she stepped closer, her shadow falling gently across the pavement so the girl could sense her presence without fear. "Hey there," Naomi said, keeping her tone low and calm, the way her grandmother used to speak when she wanted someone to feel safe. "You okay?" The girl turned slightly toward her voice, her fingers tightening around the handle of the cane as if grounding herself. "I got turned around," she admitted, "and I think I missed my driver." And there it was, that small crack in her composure. Not panic. Not yet. but close enough that Naomi could hear it. Naomi glanced down the empty street, the distant hum of traffic echoing off buildings. No sign of anyone searching, no hurried footsteps, just the long stretch of heat and silence. And when she looked back at the girl, she noticed the way her shoulders were drawn in, the subtle tension in her posture, the quiet kind of hunger that was not just about food but about being seen, being guided, being held in a moment that felt too big. Naomi swallowed, her gaze flicking back to the open container in her hand, then back to the girl, and for a split second, the math ran through her mind again. Hours until her next meal, dollars left in her account, the long shift ahead. But the numbers did not hold. They slipped away under the weight of something else, something older than logic. She stepped closer, lowering herself until she was at the girl's level, careful not to startle her, and gently placed the container between them. Her voice soft but certain. "You hungry?" And the girl hesitated, just long enough to be polite, before nodding once, small and honest. And in that moment, Naomi did not think about what she was giving up, only about what was needed right in front of her. Something simple, something human, something that could not wait. Naomi shifted the container slightly closer, the plastic warm from the sun, and for a moment she did not move, giving the girl space, letting the choice feel like hers, because she understood something without needing to say it. That dignity mattered even in the smallest exchanges, especially in the smallest exchanges. "It is just rice and beans," Naomi said gently, her voice carrying a softness that wrapped around the words like a quiet promise. "Nothing fancy, but it is good." And the girl's lips parted in a small, almost surprised smile, as if no one had described food to her like that before, as if the simplicity made it feel safe. Naomi reached in, breaking off a small portion with her fingers, careful, slow, and then paused. "May I?" she asked, and the girl nodded again, this time a little quicker, her hand resting lightly on her cane, her other hand opening just enough to receive, and Naomi placed the food into her palm before guiding it gently upward, describing each step so the girl would not feel lost. "Right here, just in front of you," she murmured, and the girl followed, bringing it to her mouth, chewing slowly, her shoulders easing in a way that spoke louder than any words. The alley seemed quieter now, the distant traffic fading into a soft hum, the harsh lights softened by the simple act unfolding between them. And Naomi found herself describing everything without thinking, the texture, the warmth, the way the rice held together, the slight spice in the beans, painting a picture with her voice so the girl could experience more than just the taste. "It is warm," the girl said after a moment, her voice lighter now, steadier, and Naomi smiled, even though the girl could not see it, because somehow that did not matter. "Yeah," she replied softly. "It is." And they continued like that, bite by bite, Naomi offering, the girl receiving, the rhythm settling into something natural, something almost familiar, as if they had done this before in another life. A shadow passed briefly at the edge of the alley, a man slowing his step as he glanced over, his eyes lingering just long enough to register the scene. A woman in a diner uniform feeding a child who did not belong to this part of town, his expression unreadable before he moved on, and Naomi felt the weight of that glance for half a second, the quiet judgment that often followed people like her, but she let it pass, because the moment in front of her mattered more than the story anyone else might tell about it. "What is your name?" Naomi asked gently, adjusting her tone so it felt like an invitation rather than a question, and the girl swallowed before answering. "Lily," her voice carrying a hint of pride now, as if saying it out loud anchored her again. "Lily Bennett," and Naomi nodded, committing it to memory without realizing why. "That is a beautiful name," she said, and Lily tilted her head slightly, a small smile forming again. "My mom says it is strong," she replied, and Naomi felt something tighten in her chest at that, something about the way the word strong sounded coming from such a small voice. And for a moment she wondered where that mother was, how far away, how worried she might be. But she did not let that question take over the moment. Instead she focused on the present, on the steady rhythm of sharing, on the quiet trust growing between them, on the way Lily's posture relaxed with each bite, her grip on the cane loosening just enough to show she no longer felt alone. And as the container grew lighter in Naomi's hands, She did not think about what was disappearing, only about what was being given, something that could not be measured in portions or dollars, something that, without either of them knowing yet, was about to change. Everything. The last few bites sat in the corner of the container, smaller now, almost symbolic, and Naomi noticed it the same way you notice the end of something good before you are ready for it to be over. But she did not slow down, did not pull back, because Lily's breathing had changed, steadier now, her shoulders no longer tight, her voice softer but more certain as she spoke about things Naomi could not see. The way her mother's perfume smelled like fresh rain, the way her room felt warmer near the window in the afternoons, small details that painted a world Naomi was quietly stepping into one sentence at a time. "Do you always eat out here?" Lily asked, her head tilting slightly as if she could map the space through Naomi's presence alone, and Naomi let out a soft breath, glancing around at the narrow alley, the stacked crates, the faded sign above the back door. "Just when I need a minute," she replied, choosing her words carefully, not wanting to place the weight of her life onto a child who had already wandered too far from where she should be. Lily nodded like she understood more than Naomi expected, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the container as if memorizing it. And then there was a pause, a quiet one, not empty but full, the kind that settles when something important has just happened without anyone announcing it. Naomi wiped her hands gently on a napkin pulled from her apron pocket, folding it once, twice, small movements that grounded her, and then she leaned slightly closer, her voice lowering just enough to feel private. "Do you know where your driver was supposed to pick you up?" And Lily hesitated, her lips pressing together as she thought. "Near the bookstore," she said slowly. "But I kept walking because I thought I heard music." And Naomi felt a flicker of concern rise in her chest, subtle but sharp, because the city did not always forgive small mistakes, especially for someone who could not see the danger before it arrived. She glanced again toward the street, the sunlight stretching longer now, the heat beginning to soften, but still no sign of anyone searching, no hurried voices calling Lily's name, just the distant rhythm of a place that did not yet realize something was missing. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, the empty container now resting loosely in her hand, and for the first time she felt the quiet echo of her own hunger, not loud, not demanding, but present, a reminder of what she had given, and yet it did not carry regret, only a faint awareness that she would need to push through the rest of her shift on less than she had planned. A car passed at the far end of the street, slowing just briefly before continuing on, its presence leaving behind a ripple of unease that Naomi could not fully explain, and she instinctively moved a little closer to Lily, not touching her, but near enough that the girl could sense she was not alone. "You did the right thing staying still," Naomi said gently, offering reassurance in a tone that carried quiet authority. "Someone is going to come looking for you." And Lily nodded, her grip on the cane loosening further as she turned her face slightly toward Naomi's voice, trusting it, anchoring herself to it in a way that felt deeper than a simple interaction between strangers. The moment stretched again, calm but fragile, like glass catching the light, and Naomi did not know it yet. But somewhere beyond that quiet street, beyond the heat and the silence, something had already been set in motion, something that would not just find Lily, but would come all the way back to find her. The sound came first, distant but urgent, the kind of sound that did not belong to the slow rhythm of that street. Tires rolling faster than usual, engines cutting through the quiet like something searching, and Naomi's head lifted instinctively, her eyes narrowing toward the end of the block as two dark vehicles turned the corner almost at the same time, their movement controlled but unmistakably purposeful, and in that instant, something in the air shifted, the calm they had been sitting in, thinning just enough to reveal the tension underneath. Lily heard it too, her body going still, her fingers tightening slightly around the handle of her cane. "That sounds like them," she whispered, uncertainty and hope tangled together in her voice. And Naomi felt a subtle relief pass through her, not loud, not overwhelming, but enough to loosen the quiet knot that had been forming in her chest. The vehicles slowed as they approached, tires easing against the pavement, and before they even came to a full stop, a man stepped out from the front passenger seat, his movements quick but measured, scanning the area with the sharp awareness of someone used to responsibility, his gaze landing on Lily almost immediately, and everything about his posture changed, the tension in his shoulders dropping just enough to show recognition. "Lily," he called, his voice steady but edged with something deeper. Something that had been held back until this exact moment, and Lily turned toward the sound without hesitation, her face lighting up in a way that made her look younger than she had just moments before. "I am here," she answered, her voice clear now, grounded again, and Naomi watched as the distance between them closed, not physically rushed, but emotionally immediate, like a missing piece sliding back into place. The man slowed as he reached them, crouching slightly so his presence would not overwhelm her, his tone softening. "We have been looking everywhere," he said, and though his words were calm, the weight behind them lingered in the space, a quiet reminder of how close something had come to being lost. Naomi stepped back just a fraction, giving them room, her hand lowering to her side, the now empty container light against her fingers, and for a moment she felt invisible again in the way she was used to, part of the background, part of the space people moved through without noticing, and she was ready to let it stay that way, to slip back into her routine, her shift, her life, without needing anything more. But Lily did not let go of the moment so easily, her hand reaching out, searching until it found Naomi's sleeve, her grip gentle but certain. "This is her," she said, her voice carrying a quiet insistence that made the man look up, really look, for the first time, his eyes settling on Naomi with a new kind of attention, not suspicion, not dismissal, but curiosity layered with something else, something like understanding beginning to form. Naomi felt it in the way he studied her, the uniform, the worn shoes, the simple presence that did not match the significance of the moment he had just stepped into, and for a second, the world seemed to pause again, not in tension this time, but in recognition, something unspoken passing between them as Lily's small hand remained wrapped around Naomi's sleeve, holding the connection in place just a little longer than anyone expected. The man's gaze lingered on Naomi for a second longer than expected, as if trying to reconcile what he saw with what he had just been told, and then he straightened slightly, his expression shifting into something more formal, more composed, the kind of control that comes from years of moving through situations where every detail matters. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. But there was a depth beneath it that suggested the words carried more weight than they sounded, and Naomi nodded once. A small, almost reflexive motion, because gratitude was not something she waited for, not something she measured her actions against. It was simply something that either came or did not. Lily's hand remained lightly on her sleeve, her fingers tracing the fabric as if memorizing it, anchoring the moment in a way that felt important to her, and Naomi could feel that quiet connection lingering, something gentle and unspoken that did not need explanation. "You were not scared," Lily said softly, turning her face slightly toward Naomi's voice, and Naomi let out a faint breath, not quite a laugh, not quite an answer. "I was a little," she admitted, her tone honest but calm. "But you were braver than me. And Lily smiled at that, small but real, the kind of smile that comes when someone feels seen rather than helped. The man glanced between them, his eyes narrowing just slightly, not in suspicion, but in realization, as if he was beginning to understand that what had happened here was not just a matter of finding a lost child, but something quieter, something harder to define, something that did not fit neatly into the categories he was used to. He reached into his jacket for a moment, then paused, his hand still, reconsidering whatever he had intended to do, and instead he spoke again. "We will make sure you are recognized for this," he said, the words polished, practiced, but Naomi shook her head gently before he could finish, not dismissive, not defensive, just certain. She just needed someone to sit with her. Naomi replied, her voice even, grounded in a simplicity that made the statement feel larger than it was, and for a moment, the man did not respond, because there was nothing in his usual vocabulary that matched that kind of answer. The air shifted again, softer this time, the urgency fading into something calmer, more settled, and Lily's grip loosened slightly, though she did not let go completely, her presence still leaning toward Naomi as if she was not ready to fully release the connection they had built in such a short time. A second person stepped out from the rear vehicle, speaking quietly into a phone, their voice low and controlled, and Naomi caught fragments of it without meaning to. Words like located, safe, confirmed, each one carrying a weight that suggested this moment reached further than the alley they stood in, further than she had imagined. Naomi glanced down at the empty container in her hand, the faint trace of warmth now gone, replaced by the lightness of something finished, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel the absence of what had been there, not as loss, but as a quiet echo, a reminder that she had given something real, something that could not be undone or taken back. "I have to go back to work," she said after a moment, her voice soft but practical, because life did not pause for moments like this. It continued, steady and demanding, and the man nodded, understanding in a way that did not need explanation. "Of course," he replied, stepping slightly aside to clear her path, but Lily's hand tightened just once more, a gentle hesitation, a silent request for one more second, and Naomi leaned down just enough for her voice to reach her clearly. "You are going to be okay," she said, and Lily nodded, holding on to that certainty like it was something she could carry with her long after this moment ended. The vehicles pulled away slowly, one after another, their engines fading into the distance until the street returned to its usual quiet. But something had shifted, something Naomi could not name yet, something that lingered in the air like the last note of a song you cannot forget. And she stood there for a moment longer than she needed to, the empty container still in her hand, her mind catching up to what had just happened. Then the world resumed, as it always did. A screen door creaked. Somewhere down the block, a car passed with its radio low. A neighbor coughed on a front porch, and Naomi turned back toward the diner, her steps steady but her thoughts quieter than usual, as if they were trying to settle into a new shape. The rest of her shift moved forward in the same rhythm it always had. Orders called out, plates stacked, the hum of conversation blending into the clatter of dishes. But there was a difference now, a softness behind everything, like the edges of the day had been rounded just slightly. She did not mention what had happened, not to the cook, not to the cashier, not even when someone joked about the heat or the slow afternoon, because the moment did not feel like something to explain. It felt like something to carry, quietly, without needing anyone else to see it. When her break came again, she did not open a container this time. She just sat, her hands resting loosely in her lap, the familiar ache of hunger present but distant, as if it had been pushed to the side by something else that mattered more, something that filled a different kind of space. The sun dipped lower as the hours passed, casting long shadows across the pavement, and by the time Naomi stepped out at the end of her shift, the air had cooled just enough to feel like relief, a soft breeze moving through the narrow streets, carrying the faint scent of evening. She walked home the way she always did, the same cracked sidewalks, the same quiet corners, but her pace slowed once or twice without her realizing it, her mind returning to the sound of Lily's voice, the way her hand had held onto her sleeve, the way something so small had felt so certain. When she reached her door, she paused again, her fingers resting on the handle as she looked down the street, now empty, no sign that anything unusual had happened there at all, no trace of the vehicles, no evidence of the moment that had quietly unfolded in the middle of an ordinary day. And for a second she wondered if it would stay that way, if it would remain just a memory, something that mattered only to her and a child she might never see again. She stepped inside, the soft click of the door closing behind her, the room dim and still, and she set the container down on the small kitchen counter, rinsing it out without thinking, the water running steady as she moved through the simple routine, grounding herself in the familiar. But even as she dried her hands and turned off the light, something remained, not loud, not overwhelming, just present, like a quiet promise waiting somewhere just beyond what she could see, something that had already begun to move long before she ever realized it would come back to find her. The next morning arrived quietly, the kind of quiet that settles before the world fully wakes, and Naomi Carter stood in her small kitchen with a cup of coffee that had already begun to cool, the faint light from the window stretching across the counter, touching the same container she had washed the night before, now dry and placed neatly beside the sink, as if it were just another ordinary object in an ordinary life. But her eyes lingered on it for a second longer than necessary, not because it looked different, but because something inside her did. Outside, The first sound came again, low and distant, the hum of engines rolling into a street that was not used to being noticed, and Naomi froze mid-step, the cup still in her hand as she turned her head slightly, listening, her body recognizing the sound before her mind caught up, and then it grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable, multiple vehicles, steady, controlled, purposeful, the same kind of presence that had passed through her life just days before. She set the cup down slowly, her fingers releasing it with care, and walked toward the front door, each step measured, not rushed, but drawn forward by something she could not ignore, and when she opened it, the morning air met her again, cooler now, softer, but the sight waiting outside was anything but ordinary. A line of black SUVs stretching along the curb, their surfaces reflecting the early light like polished glass, their engines idling in quiet unison as if they had all arrived with the same intention. The street responded the same way it always did when something did not belong. Curtains shifting, doors cracking open just enough for eyes to appear, neighbors pausing mid-motion, the rhythm of the block interrupted by something larger than itself. And Naomi stood there, her bare feet against the cool wood of the porch, her hands empty now, her breath steady but deeper than usual, because this time she understood that this was not a mistake, not a coincidence, not something passing through. This was something that had come for her. A door opened from the center vehicle, slow, deliberate, and the woman stepped out again, composed, precise, her presence carrying the same quiet authority as before. But this time there was something different in her expression, something softer, something that had shifted beneath the surface. And beside her, holding her hand, Lily stepped forward, her cane tapping lightly against the pavement, her head lifting just slightly as if she could feel exactly where Naomi stood. "You are here," Lily said, her voice bright with certainty, and Naomi felt something in her chest tighten, not from fear, but from recognition, from the way that small voice carried across the space and found her without hesitation. The woman's gaze met Naomi's then, direct and clear, and when she spoke, her tone was calm, but there was no distance left in it, no barrier of status or expectation, only something honest, something deliberate. "My daughter would not eat," she said quietly, each word placed with care. "Not until she found you." And the street seemed to fall even quieter around them, the weight of that sentence settling into the space between them, because this was no longer just about a moment in an alley, no longer just about a small act of kindness. It was about something that had reached across days, across distance, and returned with a force Naomi had never expected to face. Naomi did not answer right away, not because she did not understand, but because the meaning of those words moved through her slowly, settling deeper with each second, and she found herself looking not at the woman, not at the line of vehicles, but at Lily, at the way the girl stood there with quiet certainty, her small hand still wrapped around her mother's, her face turned toward Naomi as if nothing else in the world mattered in that moment. "You remembered me," Naomi said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that surprised even herself, and Lily nodded without hesitation, a small, confident motion that held more weight than any explanation could. "You said the food was warm," Lily replied, her voice bright with memory. "And you told me where to find it every time." And something about that detail, so simple, so specific, broke through whatever distance might have remained between them. The woman stepped a little closer then, her posture still composed, but her expression no longer guarded, the sharp edges of authority softened by something more human, something that had been reshaped by the past 3 days. "She would not eat anything I gave her," she said, her tone quiet but steady. "Not from our kitchen, not from anyone else." She kept saying it did not feel the same, and she paused, just briefly, as if choosing her next words with care, "until she told me why." And Naomi felt the weight of that explanation settle into her, not as pressure, but as recognition, because what she had given had not just been food, it had been presence, attention, something that could not be packaged or replaced. Lily stepped forward then, her cane tapping lightly once before she let it rest, her free hand reaching out again until it found Naomi's, her fingers small but certain as they closed around it. And Naomi did not pull away, did not hesitate. She simply let the connection happen. as natural now as it had been in that alley, as if no time had passed at all. The street remained still around them, the quiet now filled not with tension, but with something softer, something that felt like understanding spreading outward, touching even the neighbors who watched from behind half-open doors. I wanted to say thank you. The woman continued, her voice carrying a sincerity that did not need to be emphasized, not just with words. And for a moment Naomi thought she understood what was coming, an offer, an opportunity, something large and structured that belonged to a world she had never stepped into, and she felt a familiar instinct rise in her, a quiet resistance to anything that tried to turn something simple into something transactional. But before the woman could continue, Naomi shook her head gently, not dismissing, not refusing, just redirecting, her voice calm and grounded. She just needed someone to stay, she said again. The same truth, unchanged, and Lily's hand tightened slightly at that, as if confirming it, as if holding on to the part of the moment that mattered most. The woman fell silent then, her gaze resting on Naomi in a way that no longer measured or assessed, but simply acknowledged. And in that pause, something shifted once more, not in status, not in power, but in understanding, because for the first time, the space between them was not defined by what they had, but by what they had seen. The morning light moved a little higher, catching the edges of the vehicles, reflecting softly across the street, and Naomi stood there, her hand still held, her breath steady, her world unchanged in every visible way, and yet something within it had opened, something quiet but lasting, like a door that did not close once it had been seen. And as Lily's fingers rested in hers, Naomi realized that sometimes the smallest moment does not end when it is over. It simply waits until it returns and shows you what it became.